Can everybody hear me? Just type a yes or something so that I know that the audio is working, because we did have issues last time. Okay, cool. All right, all good, all good. Okay, sorry, I just I went to get a cup of my green tea before we start. So we attempted this webinar on a similar webinar on Tuesday, and unfortunately our internet went down, so it was a little bit disappointing. But what I wanted to chat about was, I wanted to just dive a little bit into nutrition. In the meantime, if you have got questions, it's best you type them out so that at least when I finish saying what I have to say, I can start answering some questions around nutrition, around lockdown, around health, exercise, how they fit together, etc. And let's go from there. So I think I just want to start by saying that lockdown for all of us is a very big challenge. I think emotionally it's a big challenge. I know that in our climate we like to be outdoors quite a bit, and for those of us that don't have the luxury of gardens and a lot of sunshine and we're locked indoors, it is a very difficult place to be. I think many of us are also worried about what's going to happen after lockdown, how it's going to impact us financially. This is like we're living in a movie. In actual fact, I mean, it's been the most unexpected, I think, few months, and for some of us, few weeks that any of us could ever have imagined. So, what are the key issues that I find for most people that I work with? What I'm finding at the moment is that, first of all, people that are stuck at home, especially if they've got children, they don't really find a lot of time for themselves, and therefore they actually land up not even eating, and when they actually land up eating, they're not eating the correct food. So that's a big stress, having kids stuck at home, having to deal with school, homework, plus take care of yourself. It's not the easiest thing. There's no me time. I think another thing is that we are in the kitchen daily. My kitchen's just down here, so it's very easily accessible. And that means that I can go in there whenever I want, grab something to eat and go out. And so a lot of people spend a lot of time in the kitchen, and generally they're making emotional decisions when it comes to picking foods to eat, because it's how they're feeling. They open up the refrigerator or the cupboard and they're like, I've got a craving, I'm just going to take this and eat this. And that's generally how it goes through the day. So they get into a bad habit of going in and out of the kitchen through the day, but making the wrong food choices. The only time we're allowed out, mainly, is actually to buy food. So there's the food picture again. Each time we leave a house, it's to go and stock up on more food. So there is another danger. What are we actually going out and buying and bringing back into our kitchen, which is very easily accessible? A lot of us generally are used to being out most of the time, and we plan everything and we take our meals with us, but now we're stuck at home and there's this in and out of the kitchen and access to food, and when we're out the house, we're also going and buying food because that's what we're allowed to do. I mean, there are other essentials, but that's the main one. And then when it comes to exercise, I think from an exercise point of view, most of us, or maybe less fortunate people, do not have all that equipment that they're used to having in a gym. They can't run outdoors or cycle outdoors. They might not have indoor trainers or treadmills. There are some people that are fortunate enough to be able to train quite a bit. But for most people, the training volume has come down. And if they are training, again, the sessions are actually a lot shorter, and it tends to be a lower calorie burn rate per day. So basically, this means from a weight perspective, if you're eating a certain amount every day when you have been active, and now all of a sudden you're less active, you actually have to eat less in order to make sure that you maintain weight. You cannot carry on eating the same amount of food. It's just not going to work, and you'll actually end up putting on weight through lockdown. So it's very important to bring back that sort of calorie intake to make sure that it isn't a deficit from the amount of calories that you're burning off. Obviously, it's not just about calories, it's also about the kind of foods that you're actually eating. So, the only advice I can give right now, don't enter the kitchen and eat emotionally, because that is what most of us are doing. I generally suggest that you plan your meals the day before. so that when you do go into the kitchen, you know exactly what you're going to eat from maybe a breakfast or recovery meal, lunch, dinner, snacks, etc., and you stick to that. Don't get that emotional, I'm going to take a food and I'm going to just eat it because I feel like eating it. Make the healthy decisions. I mentioned this in the webinar we did on Tuesday. There's a quote that I use quite often, which I made up quite a number of years ago, and that is that once it's past your lips, you've lost all possible means of control. The point of control is the selection point, is what you're going to eat. But once you've eaten it, that window of opportunity is gone. It will do what it does to your body. If it's bad, it's going to do the bad to the body. If it's good, it's going to do the good to the body. So make sure you make that wise selection. So that's the first thing, planning your meals and sticking to it. When it comes to food types, healthy vegetables and fruits, lower sugar fruits, high fiber vegetables, etc., higher fiber carbs are a lot better. Things that don't cause excessive rise in blood sugar. Go for lean proteins so that you're able to decide as well the quantity or the volume of the fat that you're eating. And when it comes to eating fat, stick to mainly unsaturated fats. They're far healthier. They're much more anti-inflammatory. You're talking about mainly your plant-based fats. There are some exceptions. When we do get into my course, I'll talk about what those exceptions are, but I think that is also quite crucial. Something I wanted to show you as well, the tools of the trade are so important. Okay, I brought a bowl here. Okay, it's quite a standard cereal or porridge sized bowl or soup bowl, but it's actually quite big. Most people will, if they put something in here, like whether it's oats or granola or whatever cereal or porridge they want, or soup, they can fill it to the top, but it's quite a big bowl. One of the things that I do, and I do recommend is, and I've actually got a little meal over here, is I go with a small bowl. What does that do? It makes sure that my portion sizes are much better. I'm not going to overeat. I can fill that bowl to the top and it's not too much food. But if I fill the big bowl to the top, it's a lot more food. And your body will manage a lot better by eating smaller amounts over a frequent period of time as opposed to eating larger amounts. If I had to eat this amount in that large bowl, I will cause an excessive rise in blood sugar. Although there's not many carbs in here, in actual fact, this is actually a protein bowl. It's actually a protein meal. And I tend to use smaller things. You'll also notice I don't have a tablespoon. I've got a teaspoon. A teaspoon also allows me to control the amount of food that I'm eating at a time. I eat slower. I feel satiated for longer periods of time. That's just a little trick that I give a lot of people. I think that helps quite a bit. So just something to take note of. The tools of the trade, the sizing of the crockery that you're eating in can play a very crucial role to how much you eat. I remember once, many years ago, I did a talk to one of the running clubs, one of the big running clubs in the country, and one of the Future Life dietitians was there, and they were explaining how Future Life is low GI, and it is low GI. But remember, the glycemic index is measured per a portion of serving. In other words, if you eat a 50-gram portion, without a doubt, it's low GI. But if I had to take a bowl like this and fill it all the way up to the top, the glycemic index, or the GI index, as we know, which measures the blood glucose response based on a portion of food, it's out the window. Why? Because now we move to what's called glycemic loading, which means that if you eat a large volume of food at any one time, that's got the ability to cause a rise in blood sugar, it will cause an excessive rise in blood sugar. So portion control is crucial. So that's all I'm going to talk a little bit about today. I want to try and answer some of the questions that some of you have asked. So I'm just going to look through some of them. I see somebody said, my wife has been baking a lot for the family. What would be better alternatives to wheat flour, white, brown, caster sugar? Well, caster sugar is sugar. It's just finely ground sugar. It's just very finely ground sugar. So it's sugar. You know, you can get so many different kinds of ways of sweetening things. Just taking like vanilla, for example, can add flavor to something. Cinnamon, for example, can add flavor to something. And you can get some natural sweeteners like a stevioglycosides, like a stevia. It works very well. People say to me coconut sugar, but coconut sugar is also sugar. So you've got to understand that fructose is also sugar, and it's actually a bad form of sugar. So in excessive amounts especially. So the idea is to try and maybe flavor it afterwards and not really flavor it too much during by using these sweeteners, because they are going to cause a sugar craving. Generally, it's better to try and avoid sweet, and it takes about 21 days to train the brain to be able to try and resist those sugar cravings. But the minute you sweeten something, the brain will crave sweet, and it's very hard to get away from that. As far as different flours go, again, it's better to use high fiber, sort of whole grain kinds of flours. I use flours like teff. I use grains like millet, like quinoa, which are very, very healthy. It's gone out now. Amaranth is another grain that I use. All of these are quite high fiber, actually got a nice protein portion in. Even oats can be a form of flour. You can grind it into a flour, or you can buy oats flour as well. It's definitely higher fiber than just a plain wheat flour. If you're gluten intolerant, obviously you can't go with wheat anyway, and you need to find something that is gluten-free. As far as, I've got another question here. Before lockdown, I normally go without eating before 10 to 15 kilometer runs. Before a marathon, I struggle to determine how much is enough to eat before the race. Suggestions and what would help. Look, fasted training is absolutely brilliant, especially if you're in lockdown. I actually had a bit of a debate with a friend today because he's going on an intermittent fasting diet of 16 hours fasted, 8 hours eating, and he wanted to fast from 4 in the morning till around 8 o'clock the next morning. So 4 in the afternoon till 8 o'clock the next morning. The best time to fast would be through the night to the morning, and to extend that morning upwards. Why? Because when you wake up in the morning, you will be more in a fat burn zone. Generally, your blood sugar will be lower unless you've eaten an excessive amount of something the night before, and it's probably better to fast at that time of day. Obviously, if you're going to put in hard training sessions, you need to make sure that when you do break that fast, you actually end up eating. But to get back to the question that Alistair asked, so short fasted training sessions are great. But if you're going to be doing a long, hard session or a marathon, etc., you do need to eat a couple of hours before, and generally that would be around 2 to 3 hours before. If it's 2 hours before, we generally look at a meal of around anywhere between, I would say, 250 up to 350 calories per meal, but it really depends on also the size of the person and what he can handle. As you get closer to the starting time of any race or training session, that amount needs to drop probably by half. So you might have to take it down to 150 calories. You can't have food being processed and going through the digestive process, especially in the upper bowels, if you're now going to go and do an intense session. It has to be digested, and it probably will cause a slight elevation in blood sugar, hopefully not too much, but a slight elevation in blood sugar that provides your body sufficient glucose so that when you do start doing your exercise or training session, it will be used as a first source of fuel. So that's quite important to understand. Kim, I've lost weight in lockdown, but I'm eating the same amount and am far less active. Would this be due to muscle wastage from lack of use? Could be two things. One thing is, yes, muscle we know weighs more than fat because of the density. And obviously, for example, many years ago when I was ill and I couldn't train at all, I was bedridden for a few months with a serious illness, my weight dropped significantly. My body fat actually sort of stayed the same, but my weight dropped significantly. And in the end, it was actually a loss of muscle and not a loss of fat. But I'm not saying that that's the only reason. The other thing is that you might still be eating in a calorie deficit. You might actually have been, I watched a very interesting video by Dr. Mark Hammond last night, and they were speaking about that, and this is something that I've focused on for a long time, is about insulin management. They were speaking about you can train as much as you want and as hard as you want, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose weight, because weight management is really all about the kind of food that you're eating, and it generally boils down to insulin management. So in other words, how you're controlling those insulin levels. And if you can keep those insulin levels really right down, there's absolutely no doubt that you'll be able to drop fat quite easily, and you'll be able to also drop your body weight. So it could be that you are eating in a deficit. It might not necessarily be in just a lack of, a drop in muscle use. In other words, muscle atrophy, we call it, is when the muscles actually start to atrophize, and that can be a weight drop. You might be less active, but you have to do just a very little bit of exercise to prevent muscle atrophy anyway. You don't have to do a large amount of exercise. Sharon says, I know you mentioned before that honey is too sweet. By the way, honey is sugar. Don't try and differentiate between sugar and honey. They're exactly the same thing. One sugar, the other one sugar. They pretty much do the same thing to the body. Obviously, the one might have a little, if it's raw, it might have a few benefits, things like propolis, etc., more nutrients than sugar. But from a calorie point of view, sugar is sugar. But what she's asking is, she uses date syrup usually. Can I use maple syrup instead? You can use it, but just remember that all these things are forms of sugars. One's plant-based, one's animal-based. You need to use it in small portions so that it doesn't impact your blood sugar significantly. Obviously, if you overdo it, I mean, I see some of these adverts and these recipes that people put, and they put like half cups or cups of honey into a homemade bread, and I'm thinking, well, that's crazy. You might as well just go and eat the sugar off the spoon. It doesn't make sense to me. So keep them limited, and those portions limited. And if you manage that, you're managing your insulin levels. I promise you can't go wrong. I've been asked here 16-8 intermittent fasting. If you do it at the right time, is it a good method, and how long should you follow it for? It's a very interesting question. It also depends on how active you are. I'm very anti-intermittent fasting when somebody's training very hard, because it can lead to fatigue. The body might not recover. So it's like a domino effect. And what happens is that it can land up causing problems. So the question is, are you trying to lose weight? Are you trying to manage your insulin levels? Or are you actually trying to perform as an athlete? Are you trying to improve your performance? If you're trying to improve your performance, you need to fuel your performance. You can't go and fast and starve yourself. It's a very difficult thing. I've tested during stages of peak training. I've tested trying to do intermittent fasting 16-8 actually for me once every 3 days to allow my body to deal with that, recover, and then hit it again. And it worked pretty well. So you can cycle it, which might not be a bad idea, but each person will be unique. Obviously, when you put your body into that state, you are going to obviously put yourself into a fat burn state. Generally, what I recommend is that if you're doing a 16-8, your cutoff time for eating should be 8 o'clock at night, and you eat your recovery meal the next day at 12. Somebody said to me today, but what about training? And I said, you can train. You can absolutely train. Your tanks will be completely loaded in the morning. You've got 40,000 calories worth of fat. You've got probably around close to 2,000, 2,400 calories of glycogen. You can do a hard training session in the morning, hour and a half. You can rehydrate afterwards, and you can still eat a recovery meal at 12. But you need to split this meal up. You can't go and eat a massive recovery meal. The best thing to do, and I've experimented with this a lot in the past and with athletes, is if you're going to do an intermittent fasting and you break it, you're going to eat at 12, at 12:30. So what you do is you have smaller meals, and then you go and you eat again an hour apart and then 2 hours apart. So smaller meals more frequently to make sure that 8-hour window period, you're maximizing the nutrient absorption. You're not causing an excessive rise in blood sugar. You also need to make sure that you get your protein in. Protein is very crucial. It's something that I mentioned earlier, eating in proteins. Protein and fat is what keeps you satiated and will keep the hunger at bay as well. So you need to make sure that you eat the right amounts. How much water do you drink in a day? Asked Ed, varies due to levels in training, I'm sure. Absolutely. So if you're not training, you should probably drink around 30 to 40 milliliters of fluid in the form of water, or you can maybe even have herbal teas, per a kilogram of body weight, which means if you weigh 60 kilograms and you're drinking 30 to 40 mils, that's about 1.8 to 2.4 liters of water a day. You say it's too much, it's not. That's the right amount. Now, if you train, you need to now calculate how much fluid you're losing in the form of sweat. So you're going to lose even more than that. If you lose 600 milliliters an hour, you try to replenish it. You don't have to take in the exact 600 milliliters, but you want to try and aim for about an 80% replenishment. So you may be looking around 400 milliliters, which would take your 2.4 liters up now to 2.8 liters, because you need to incorporate it during training. Although most athletes or people that are in the gyms, they do walk around drinking water, having a water bottle with them, and replenishing themselves. Remember, the human body is 76% water. It is so crucial. If you do not take in enough fluid, it's also very difficult to manage your weight. The body requires water constantly. Before races, I always got diarrhea. I changed to a meal shake instead of muesli, and it seems to be much better. But I get hungry during the race. What can I do to prevent diarrhea but not get hungry? So look, irritable bowel pre-race can be brought on by many things. Generally, what I recommend with athletes is to avoid certain foods, especially sometimes 72 hours even before a race, but definitely within the 48 to 24 hours before a race or a hard training session. There's a lot of people that suffer from IBS when it comes to, or they call it the runs, when it comes to eating before training. I've worked with many over the years, and it's not so easy to find the right solution. The first thing is cut out fiber. High fiber can cause the stomach to become irritable, and it can cause it to run for sure. It does get it activated as well. So the best thing is instead of eating brown whole grain or high fiber rice, as an example, go for white rice. Instead of eating brown bread or whole wheat toast, go with white bread or white toast. So a lower fiber meal before training. The other thing I recommend to people is to avoid dairy, because dairy can impact people that are lactose intolerant. If you do not have enough lactase enzymes to break down the lactose in the body, it can cause issues with the stomach as well. So there's something that's also very important. You need to experiment with foods that impact your body negatively to see what works and what doesn't work. And then we can get into what we call FODMAP foods. And the FODMAP foods are the foods that actually ferment. They may be the different types of sugars that will ferment at different stages of the digestive system, things like fructose, alveols, etc. And all of those will digest at a different rate, different gut bacteria that's impacted by them. And FODMAP foods can also cause severe impact. I know that I'm personally impacted by certain FODMAPs. For example, some people, if they eat lentils, they get stomach issues. Some people can stomach lentils quite easily. Some people might say, I can have peas, or I can't have peas, but I can eat lentils. Everybody's different, and it's a matter of process of elimination to see what works, what doesn't work. The most important thing is keep it simple. Don't go and create a big complex soup, for example. You need to make sure that what you eat, your digestive system is agreeing with. Okay, so Vernon, I hope that answers your question there. Under lockdown, weight management for now, very important to manage weight. You need to be eating less than what you're taking in. A lot of people ask me about low carb, high fat eating. I'm not a big fan of it because you end up eating too much of the wrong types of food. And to be quite honest, a lot of people say low carb, high fat, and some people call it high protein. There's no such thing as high protein. Protein is a set factor. You need to know how much you need to eat every day. It's the one constant in a diet is the protein factor. And depending on what you do, if you're a strength athlete, an endurance athlete, a sedentary person, the amount of protein that you consume during the day needs to match what your lifestyle is. And that's quite important. The carbohydrates and the fats, they work around the protein intake. The type of carbs and the amount of carbs and the type of fats and the amount of fats that you're eating, they will differ from person to person. You don't have to cut carbohydrates to lose weight. In actual fact, you really don't at all. And you've got to think that there are very healthy carbs out there which are nutrient dense. They're very high in vitamins and minerals. And if you cut those out, then where are you going to get your vitamins and minerals? You're going to have to rely on supplementation, which I'm not a big fan of. I always believe supplementation should be only in addition to a healthy diet, and you can get a lot from natural foods. So not to cut that. I was on a low carb, high fat diet for a period of 2 years. I finger pricked myself every single day with a ketone meter, running bloods, making sure I was in ketosis. It weakened my immune system. It weakened me. It just wasn't suitable to my active lifestyle. I found when I went back to carbohydrates, it helped me a lot better. Without a doubt, I was pushing much bigger power numbers. I was much stronger. when I switched back to eating carbs. And during that period, yes, I was more fat efficient, and I was burning off large amounts of fat as a source of energy. But quite interesting enough is when I increased my carbohydrate intake and I ate the right amount of carbs at the right times, I still leaned out and I still burned fat. And you don't have to go to a fat burn zone just by eating carbohydrates. So, I mean, you can drop those carbs that cause an impact to blood sugar, because those are the weight gainers. But fat is also a weight gainer. You need to make sure you don't overeat the fat. You need to eat the right amounts. I know people that go on low carb, high fat diets that just overeat the fat and they can't see the results. You've got to remember that a gram of fat is 9 calories, a gram of carbs and a gram of protein is 4 calories. So you're talking about double the amount of energy or double the amount of calories in a gram of fat. So you do need to be careful about how much you do eat. It still needs to fall in line with your total calorie intake. The other thing is that a lot of people that go on low carb, high fat diets, they start to eat the wrong kinds of fats. In other words, they're eating more saturated than unsaturated fats. We know that saturated fats are one of the biggest causes of cardiovascular disease globally. If you're going to eat fats, you go mainly with unsaturated, which are mainly your plant-based fats, and that is so much more crucial to eat than eating saturated fats. So people eat a lot of saturated fats, and generally in the form of dairy, like cheeses, they eat lamb chops, all these kinds of things. The long-term impact from a health point of view is not good. They haven't even got the science to show what it does very, very long-term. But one thing's for sure, and you can ask any person that's a cardio, that's in the cardiology profession, and they'll tell you that saturated fats is one of the biggest reasons. I actually work with a cardiologist recently, and he is a vegan, and his cholesterol levels were terrible, and he's a cardiologist. And the reason that his cholesterol levels were terrible wasn't the fact that, because he's saying he's a vegan, he's eating plant-based, but the problem is that they were eating a lot of processed vegan foods. And because they were eating a lot of processed vegan foods, what was happening is the fats used in processed foods are bad fats, and that was causing an inflammatory disorder, which was causing elevated LDL or bad cholesterol levels. So it's very important to eat healthy, natural, and clean foods, and not to go the other way and eat processed fats, things like trans fats or hydrogenated vegetables, etc. All of these are very bad. Whether you like it or not, small amounts are bad for you. You should actually try and keep a distance from them as much as possible. Okay, so let me go here. Will fasting help weight management? Okay, I haven't really answered that. Fasting definitely helps. Why? Because it keeps your insulin levels low. The body has to rely on burning its own fat, and that can be in the form of intramuscular triglycerides, as well as adipose tissue being converted into ketones and then actually being utilized to fuel the body. So absolutely, you can drop body weight by doing intermittent fasting. There's nothing wrong with it when you are there during lockdown. I can tell you something, that every single day of my life I pretty much fast. I don't eat usually after 8, 8:30 at night, and when I train in the mornings, my training sessions are usually finished by around 8. So probably eat my first meals around 9, sometimes even 10, and that's already you're talking already about 14 hours there. So I mean, that most people already do. So I never eat before a training session. Even when I go out on weekends on long rides, if they're 3 or 4 hours, I'll fuel during, depending, but I generally don't eat before. I like to use the body's own natural energy stores, especially if you're going in a lone zone. And just something on the fuel tanks of the human body. And I've got a nice video. It's actually sitting on the 32GI YouTube site. There's an awesome video which explains how the glycogen and the fat fuel tanks work based on intensity of exercise, etc. Maybe it's another webinar we can actually do at some stage, and I can explain to you exactly how that works. But if you want to know now how you can burn off fat and when you shouldn't be eating or increasing carbohydrate intake during exercise too much, it's worth going and watching that video. It's called I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's about the fuel tanks. Something about the fuel tanks, and it's on the 32GI YouTube site, so you can go and check that out. I've got more of a training question than nutrition. How often do you do cardio versus strength core mix sessions in a week? Do you have a rest day? I do have a rest day. Today's my rest day. Actually, to be quite honest, I wasn't feeling up to training, so I listened to the body and I decided I'll rest. I think strength is dependent on whether you're in peak racing season or not in peak racing season. If you are in a heavy racing season, you've got to understand strength work does fatigue the body. It tires you out. It does take a long time to recover from strength work. So I generally would recommend 3 to 4 strength sessions a week combined with cardiovascular exercise. If you want to lose weight quickly, increase lean muscle mass, the two together work amazingly. You can do some HIIT sessions, but combine it with some strength work, and you'll be amazed how the body fat drops just by actually doing strength work and cardiovascular work combined. Just doing cardio doesn't really increase lean muscle mass, and it's just also you're asking for trouble. To me, strength is the bricks and mortar of any endurance athlete or anything that you do, any movement you do. You're going to use your musculoskeletal system, and those muscles need to be strong, and they need to be able to manage the load. And it's very important to strengthen all those muscles to be able to build endurance on that. A strong athlete is a healthy athlete. A weak athlete is an injury-prone athlete. And that's a fact. I mean, we see it all the time. Athletes that don't do strength work, injuries are waiting to happen. How much cardio do I do a week, or how much do I suggest doing a week in combination with strength? It really depends from person to person and what their goals are. But strength and core, I would say 3 to 4 times a week, 3 minimum. And around that, you can fit cardiovascular exercise. And, for some people, they're not interested in doing endurance training or cardiovascular exercise, so they'll just do strength. But again, those strength athletes also need to do cardiovascular exercise. It works both ways. Sometimes I find that I do a very hard session like a power or a cadence session and only burn 600 calories. How many calories should I be burning to have my earned carbohydrates? So earned carbohydrates, I think she's talking about carbs that are very tasty and good. Things like breads and grains and muffins and stuff like that. So when it comes to training, I mean, burning off 600 calories, so let me explain to you how this works. If you do a very hard and high intensity session, okay, the good thing about that is that when you finish the session, it doesn't matter how many calories you've burnt off in that session. Your metabolic rate will be elevated a lot longer through the day. So that means through the day, you're still going to be burning off a lot more calories. And that's why high intensity sessions are so crucial for weight loss. If you do a very low intensity session, when you stop that session, that metabolic rate doesn't keep elevated for much longer through the day. So what you've burned through that session is quite low. So that's why you can afford to eat a little bit more. But I would say take advantage of it. Portion control those meals. Don't cause an excessive rise in blood sugar, and try and stay under that excessive blood glucose zone and try and keep on burning fat. So it's quite important to understand that there's burning calories during a session, but high intensity, it will keep you burning for hours afterwards. Low intensity will not keep you burning for hours afterwards. So a high intensity session even though it's the same amount of calories compared to the other one, doesn't mean that there's no benefit later on during the day. But you can upset that, because you can go, like some people do after a hard 2 or 3 hour ride, they'll go and sit at Mug and Bean and they'll eat 4 or 5 muffins and have about 5 or 6 flat whites, and they'll even put sugar in. Well, there you've gone. Your whole session has been wasted. I would rather just time those meals more frequently. And I used an example a couple of weeks ago. There was a guy that came down from the gym. I know him quite well. He did a very hard session, and he ordered a peanut butter bomb from the Kauai, which is a big recovery shake, a smoothie. Believe it or not, that shake itself has got close to 800 calories in a single shake. That's sometimes how much people eat in a whole day. It's just a large amount. And there's no ways he burnt off 800 calories during his training session. I can guarantee you that, because he went for a jog for 45 minutes, maybe did a bit of core. There's no ways. So he said to me, I stood there, and when he was ordering, I said to him, but why are you ordering such a big recovery meal? And he said to me, because I've been training hard. And I said, well, actually, no, relative to what you were training, that is up here, and your training is down here. So he said, well, what do you advise? And I said to him, well, it's quite simple. Firstly, order the small shake, because that we know is about it's a lot less than 800 calories. I think it's about 500 or 600 calories. And then he says to me, okay, so can I drink that whole one? I said, no, you can't. I said, you can have half of it now, and an hour and a half later, you can have the other half. So what have I done? Taken the one meal, taken the other meal, and instead of combining them and increasing the glycemic load of the body, in other words, giving the body a whopping load of blood sugar at once, we've split it. So the blood sugar rise is a lot more stable as opposed to peaks and troughs. And that's something that's quite important. So I hope that answers your question, Sharon. With Ramadan fast, Jatine's asking, starting on Friday, Saturday, and it is this weekend, sure, time flies. What would you give people advice through this period? So I think the thing is that it depends when you train. I think it's difficult for most people during Ramadan to train in the mornings. I think a lot of people generally train in the evenings. I think the most important thing is that you shouldn't eat these massive meals. You should try and stabilize your blood sugar by eating smaller meals more frequently when you break the fast. And before starting the fast as well, before sunrise, when you do have a chance to eat, you should probably eat something that's going to be pretty much lower, maybe lower carb, a right amount of protein, maybe a bit of higher fat to try and help fuel you. So something that's sort of low glycemic, but sort of higher on the fat end that helps keep you stable through the day so that your energy levels are a little bit more stable. I know that it takes a while for the body to adapt when you do hit a fast period. So over a couple of days, the body will adapt quite nicely and you will be in a nice fat burn zone, that's for sure. I mean, if you're doing that fasting every day, your body's going to hit a fat burn zone. The problem is that when people break the fast in the evenings after sunset, Ramadan, is that they go and they eat a lot of stuff, which causes a rise in blood sugar. Then they sleep, and now their blood sugar is elevated during sleep. That's the wrong way to do it. The right approach is, again, to keep the amount of carbohydrates that you eat post-breaking the fast quite small. Now, I've seen two types of people, individuals. Some train immediately after the fast, and they actually don't really eat. They go into their training and they carry on training and then they go. That's quite a difficult thing to do because you're having fasting the whole day. So it's hard on the energy system. I would say that maybe you should have something small before you train, even if it's a banana. But again, some people might train just before sunset and then afterwards they break. You can do that, but you can't do a high intensity session if that happens. The high intensity session, maybe you break the fast, do the high intensity session, and then you eat another recovery meal afterwards. So, I mean, maybe I can do something specifically on that and put something together, a webinar point of view just on Ramadan and fasting, because I think it actually is not just for people at religious purpose, but people who like to fast just from an intermittent fasting point of view, that they like to try to see. It does work, but again, it depends on what you're requiring. I know that it especially now, maybe it's a blessing in disguise that comrades and all these events have been put off because I think Ramadan over the last few years and now this year would have been it's a tough one. When you're gearing up for a big event like that and you're fasting every day, it is a tough one. But the interesting thing is when you're fasting like that, you should be losing weight. And a lot of people don't because they're eating the incorrect foods. Does your blood type matter when considering certain foods for meal plan or diet? I'm not a big fan of eating for your blood because I personally believe that your genetics have changed over the years, your bodies have adapted over the years. I mean, we might have been meat eaters hundreds of thousands of years ago, and then suddenly from generation to generation, everything's changed, and we obviously we got genetic inheritance from all those generations. So there's big debates as to whether yes, for and against. I'm not going to argue either for or against because each person has to make up their own mind. But I can tell you something, I'm supposed to be a big meat eater, but I'm not. I'm a plant-based eater. So what works better for me? Plants, without a doubt, work a lot better for me. And that's just the way my body responds. So I think you need to find what works for you and not so much focus around a particular set diet. How can I learn to balance my carb intake and how to split and portion it? It's a very good question. And in actual fact, we are launching, and I mentioned this on Tuesday, we're launching an amazing educational platform shortly, which is a 4-step method which I developed to explain to any person how you portion your meals, how you can create your own meals. I really got tired of seeing what was happening in the nutrition space many years ago. The problem is that many nutrition professionals, dietitians, and have actually gone and become more glorified menu creators. And most of them actually create menus based on what they like and what they think is better. But, if I go and give a menu to somebody and I tell them this is what you should be eating every single day, it might be suited to what my emotional eating patterns are, what I like. I mean, generally, yes, as a professional, you need to ask a person your likes, your dislikes, food allergies, etc. You analyze everything, and then you try and create a menu around it. But it's very, very difficult for them to stick to it, because what they are lacking is that you haven't given them the tools to be able to make their own nutrition decisions and to be able to build and create their own meals. And the problem is a lot of these professionals are holding the tools back. Why? Because they want you to go for weigh-in after weigh-in every single week. Why? Because it's money. Because if you don't have the tools, you need to rely on the tool itself, and you have to go and visit the tool every week. But the minute you've got the tools, you can create your own meals. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to push the menu side away. I'm not saying it's not important, but we want to try and give you the tools to be able to make your own nutrition decisions, and you become your own nutrition expert. So when it comes to portioning carbs, proteins, fats, etc., that's exactly what we are going to teach you how to do. And there's a very simple 4-step method that I developed many years ago, which has worked very well. So stay tuned. We are going to be launching that very, very shortly. Dion, sorry, how many carbs per kilogram of body weight per day do you think is standard for active people? It depends on how active you are. I generally don't work on the carbohydrate side of things. I work on the protein. After that, I look at fat intake, because some people eat a slightly higher fat, some people eat a slightly lower fat intake, and the balance of the calories, I actually work carbohydrates around it. And in the 4-step method that I've developed, you'll actually get to see that quite nicely. I mean, it really differs from person to person, and you need to find that magic formula that works for you. What works for one person doesn't necessarily mean it will work for the next. I mean, when I studied at university, and it's quite interesting, I did an advanced sports nutrition diploma, another one about 2 years ago, and there the professor was saying that you should be eating about 500 to 600, I'm talking about like 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates daily if you listen to this app. Now, if I had to eat that much, it's just impossible for my body to consume that much. My intake is a lot lower. So I focus around the protein, I focus on the fat intake that's suited to me, and then the balance of that, ensuring that I'm in a calorie deficit if I want to lose weight, is portioned in the form of carbohydrates. But in the method that I've developed, the carbohydrates have to be further portioned, and that will be explained there as well. So I'm gonna actually end this off now, because time is actually running short. We did run over. I hope I did manage to answer a lot of your questions. I'm looking forward to carrying these on over a period of time and trying to really share as much as possible. Even as we get closer to events, we can talk about it, etc. One of the other things that I'm also trying to do is provide some interesting recipes and different kinds of foods, healthy, of course, that you guys will be able to utilize and experiment. You can give me feedback and tell me I hate it, or I love it, or don't you have something for this. So if you guys have got any ideas or any topics that you wish me to talk on and that we can actually try and get some nice conversations going, it would be great. I am looking at also bringing some other industry experts into some of these webinars where we can get different opinions on different things. You know, you can't be an expert in everything, and I think that sharing knowledge from experts to the public is really, really important, so that the public actually know how to make up their own minds. So thank you so much for joining. We'll chat soon, and just stay patient. Lockdown hopefully is nearly over. I know there'll probably be a soft lockdown afterwards, but stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll chat soon. All the best.